Today, we're going to unpack the story of the Gulf Livestock 1. It's a modern maritime tragedy for sure, but it's also a story that asks some really tough questions about safety, rules, and who's actually held responsible when things go horribly wrong out on the open ocean. So here's the core mystery we're looking at. On September 2nd, 2020, this ship, the Gulf Livestock 1, sends out a distress signal and then just vanishes. It's carrying 43 people and thousands of cattle. But the thing is, it wasn't just caught in a bad storm. It sailed straight into the path of Typhoon Maysak, one of the most powerful storms that year. The big question is, why? Why would they do that? And this was one of the last messages sent from the ship. It came from a 27-year-old Australian stockman on board, William Mainprize, who was messaging his sister, and it's haunting. You know, that sense of confidence. We're a big boat, right? Before disaster strikes. It really brings home the human side of this whole thing. All right, so to really get what happened here, we've got to look at the ship's final journey and the absolutely colossal storm it decided to take on. And what's just so mind-boggling is what you see here. The satellite data from that day is crystal clear. You've got Typhoon Maysak, this monster Category 4 storm with winds whipping over 300 kilometers an hour, kicking up waves over 15 meters high. And every other ship in the area, they're all running for it. You can see them changing course, getting out of the way. All of them, except the Gulf Livestock 1. It just kept going, straight into the heart of the storm. And this gives you a sense of what they were sailing into. A typhoon isn't just wind. It's this huge, swirling engine of destruction. The ship sailed right into the eye wall. That's the absolute worst part of the storm, where you get the fastest winds and the heaviest rain. It's a decision that, to this day, maritime experts just can't wrap their heads around. So what was actually happening on board as this monster storm closed in? Well, the last messages from the crew, they paint a pretty terrifying picture. Yeah, that confidence we heard about earlier, it was completely gone. William Mainprice messaged a friend saying the ship was floating sideways. Another crewman, a young vet named Lucas Orta, sent this chilling text to his brothers, revealing that the engine had failed. Even the captain was in a panic, calling his girlfriend, just praying the storm would let up. For their families, these are the last words they would ever hear. And then it all happened so fast. According to one of the only survivors, Chief Officer Eduardo Sereno, the ship's engine just quit. So there they were, dead in the water, powerless in these gigantic seas. A massive wave slammed into them. The ship tilted hard. All the power went out, and then it just rolled over and sank in minutes. Out of a crew of 43, only 2 were ever found alive. Just 2. Out of 43 people, the scale of the loss of life is it's staggering. So you have to ask, right? Was this just a terrible accident? A case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was there something more going on here? Turns out, when you look into the ship's history, you find a whole trail of red flags. I mean, this ship was hardly in perfect condition. Just a little over a year before it sank, it was actually detained in Australia for having bad navigation equipment and other serious issues. A few months after that, in Indonesia, its main engine failed. And get this, just 2 weeks before its final voyage, William Mainprize sent a message saying the engine was already busted right after they left port. So the fact that the engine failed in the typhoon, it wasn't a shock. It was almost predictable. And this wasn't just about one bad ship. The problem went way deeper. In the 5 years before the sinking, investigators found 195 safety breaches across the entire fleet of the parent company, Gulf Navigation. That's not just an unlucky vessel. That points to a systemic problem with how they were maintaining their ships. And that's where you start to see a possible reason for all these problems. A motive, really. The ship's operator, a company based in Dubai, was in serious financial trouble. Auditors had warned the company might actually be insolvent, with losses over $250 million. And when a company is bleeding that much money, things like safety and maintenance are often the first things to get cut. Okay, so we have a ship with a history of problems and an owner in financial trouble. Seems like an open and shut case for an investigation, right? Well, not so fast. The world of international shipping, it's a complicated beast. And to understand why, you need to know about this thing called a flag of convenience. So the Gulf Livestock 1 was going from New Zealand to China, and it was owned by a company in the UAE, but the ship itself was registered in Panama. Companies do this all the time to shop around for countries with weaker rules, lower taxes, and, critically, less oversight. So because the ship was flying that Panamanian flag, the investigation, it's not handled by New Zealand or Australia or the Philippines, where the crew is from. Nope, it's all on the Panama Maritime Authority. And for years, the families of the 41 missing men have been waiting on that report for some answers. Well, when that report finally came out, it contained this absolute bombshell of a disclaimer, right there on the second page. It says flat out that the report can't be used for any future claim or liability. For the families who are looking for justice, maybe some compensation, that one sentence just pulls the rug out from under them. It's basically a shield against being held accountable. So with no real accountability, no real answers, what's left? Well, it's a legacy of pain for the families, but it also forced a major change in at least one country. Let's just take a moment to really process the cost here. We're talking 41 people, fathers, sons, husbands, from Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, all lost. And along with them, nearly 6,000 cattle. The families were just left in this horrible limbo, with no bodies to bury and no real explanation for why their loved ones are gone. But if there's one sliver of meaningful change that came from this horror, it's what happened in New Zealand. This disaster was a direct trigger for them to review their entire live export industry. First, they brought in stricter rules, and then they went all the way and just banned the sea export of livestock completely. It's a huge legacy, but it came at an unthinkable price. In the end, though, we come back to the people, because for the families, policy changes don't bring back their loved ones. And this quote from William Mainprice's sister, Sarah, just says it all. This idea of frozen grief, it perfectly captures what happens when a terrible tragedy is made even worse by a lack of answers and justice. And that's really what this whole story boils down to, isn't it? The sinking of the Gulf Livestock 1 isn't just about a ship in a storm. It's about a system that allows aging ships with known safety problems, owned by companies in financial distress, to operate under flags that provide cover instead of oversight. And it leaves us with one big, unsettling question. When a disaster like this happens in the vast, often lawless expanse of our oceans, who is truly held accountable?